So, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Youth Room podcast. I'm Keith, and I'm joined here today with Greg Stier, my good buddy, and we're going to be talking about future of youth ministry. We're talking about gospel advancing ministry and what that looks like in the here and now, and also some cool stats on what's happening within the gospel advancing ministry realm. We're actually here at Gospel Advancing Summit in Oakland, California, and we've been just under the teaching of some incredible people and learning a lot. So stay tuned for today's episode. All right, so now, Greg, you have been doing this for a while. Like, you had the senior pastor hat on for a little bit, and then you were doing Dare to Share on the side. You were sharing some of the origin story, a little bit about Dare to Share. And what was the kind of the trigger point for you to be like, I need to give my best time to youth ministry again?
Yeah, at the end of the day, Keith, I'm a local church guy.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus said, I will build my church, not I will build my 501c3 nonprofit parachurch organization. So I was like, man, I started Dare to Share on the side. I was a church planner. And I thought, honestly, I'd be, pastoring a church and doing Dare to Share for the rest of my life. I was part-time at the church. Even when we crossed 1,000 people, I was still part-time, even though I was the preaching pastor, because I knew with more money would come more responsibility with the church. Mm-hmm. And I said, listen, I'm not going to stop doing Dare to Share. So I will preach and I will do my part in pastoring, but I have this heart for teenagers. And the church was fine with that. The church was growing and actually getting to the point where it was really thriving. But then April 20th, 1999, I was with 6 youth pastors in the Arvada, Colorado area, which is where I live, a suburb of Denver. And the pastor at about 11:45 a.m. interrupted the meeting. I was promoting a conference we were doing at Dare to Share that was a spiritual warfare theme based on Ephesians 6:10 through 20. And the theme literally was when all hell breaks loose, strike back. Yeah. And the pastor interrupted and said, all hell's broken loose at Columbine High School. You guys may want to stop and pray. So we prayed. We had no idea how bad it was till we got to the televisions later on that afternoon. And, 2 shooters broke into Columbine High School, took 12 lives of students, killed a teacher, and then turned the guns on themselves. And, it just shook all of us. It shook me because I knew a lot of the kids at Columbine High School. I'd done retreats for them. Some of them had gone to Dare to Share. My wife's a public school teacher in the same district. And, man, I just said, okay, I'm an okay pastor, but I have this heart for the next generation. And so I resigned a few months later and I've been doing Dare to Share full time ever since.
Yeah.
Because I feel it's the best way I can serve the local church. I'm still a local church guy.
Yeah.
Mobilize. Our mission is to energize the church to mobilize youth to gospelize their world. So everything we do is to and through the local church.
Yeah. And over the years, Dare to Share has looked a little bit different. And my first interaction with Dare to Share was actually in Charlotte, North Carolina, cricket arena.
Oh, the smelly cricket arena.
Back in the day, yes. So
remember the smell of mold?
Yeah, so I was at a small church in South Carolina while I was in Bible college, and the youth pastor there, I was volunteering. He was like, hey, we're going to go do this thing called Dare to Share. And we drove up to Charlotte, which is like an hour and a half or so from Columbia where we were. And we did this thing. We slept on some church's gym floor and didn't get a wink of sleep. And I remember, if I remember correctly, I think David Crowder was there too.
Could have been there, yeah.
And so I don't remember what that was, probably like 2003, 4 maybe. And so we did this, and then I'm like, this is really challenging. I was like, we're gonna go out and share. Like, I had like zero knowledge about what to expect. Like, I didn't even know anything about it. I just was like, all right, I'm here for the ride. Like, and I show up and these kids are out there like knocking on doors, sharing the gospel, and we just saw a cool move of God's Spirit just like over the students that were, a lot of these kids like were, if not believers at all, like barely believers,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that we brought. I mean, they're like, they're all skateboarders and just kids that were rowdy and they, yeah, pulling pranks and smashing stuff with their skateboards in between. So we had to, so all this stuff, but we saw the power of God work in those students' lives. And I was like, I think there's something to this.
Yeah.
And
And we used to do these massive conferences, started in churches, then large churches, then arenas,
mm-hmm.
and, getting thousands of teenagers out, getting them inspired, equipped, and then we would take them out.
Yeah.
And, you know, youth leaders, it put them in a position where they had to lead the way.
Yeah.
Teenagers were pumped up and scared,
Mm-hmm.
which makes you dependent on the Holy Spirit. Tim Keller, I read this in a tweet.
Yeah.
He's so smart that I quote his tweets. He said, teenagers have plenty of information about God. They need to be put in a position where they're forced to trust in Him.
Yeah.
And the thing about mission trips and thing about taking students out to share Christ is it forces students to trust in the Lord. And it also does something else. People are like, well, I'm more into relational evangelism. I'm like, listen, if you're really into relational evangelism, then teach your teenagers to talk relationally to strangers on the street,
Mm-hmm.
not preach at them, but have a conversation.
Yeah.
And they're going to have more confidence to share Christ with their friends.
Yeah.
And that's where disciples get made and multiplied.
Absolutely. So then you guys, you had conferences. That was like what you're known for
Yeah.
so long. And then you kind of made a shift where, and this was kind of around the same time. So I was finishing my master's thesis, and I don't even know if you were part of this, but I remember talking to some Dare to Share staff, and at that time you had done that research for Gospelize that you
Yeah.
ended up publishing the book Gospelize, which we use and give to youth leaders all the time. And but they let me see some of that because I was like, who is doing this well? Like who is really
Yeah.
reaching. And it was part of like a problem that I was trying to solve, at our own church of, okay, I know the impact that the Lord can have, but we're not seeing that. Like what is working? What is, where are we actually seeing things fire on all cylinders? And I didn't have the common excuses that other youth leaders did. I worked at a big church. I was full-time staff. I was trained. Like I had a youth ministry degree.
Yep.
I had a budget.
Yeah.
I even had other staff, and I was like, but I know that we're not making the impact that I believe that the Lord can have. And so what's the deal? And that's when I started learning about the gospel advancing ministry values. So we've talked about the values on here, but if you're just to describe some of the values or 7 of the values, give a synopsis of that for someone that might be new or need a refresher.
Let me back it up, if you don't mind, just a little bit and tell you where they came from.
Yeah.
So we didn't develop them, we discovered them. We did that research project. The goal of the research project was not to discover the values. The goal of the research project, quite honestly, was I wanted to show to our donors and to youth leaders how effective our conferences were. But instead of finding that out, we found out that 76% of the students that left a Dare to Share event were actively sharing their faith. 6 months later, it was like 36%. Mm-hmm. So there was a 40% drop. So I was ticked. I was like, what the heck? We paid tens of thousands of dollars to find out our event is a 40% drop in effectiveness 6 months later. And our researcher was like, you know what? Number one, 36% of a youth group sharing their faith is not bad. Number two, if we find what were the common characteristics of the youth groups that did not see that massive drop.
Mm-hmm.
So we looked at a subset of this small group of, I think it was 10% of the groups saw 25% new conversion growth. So that basically after an event, they just kept growing or kept going, right? They seemed to have 7 things in common. So we kind of drew those to the top. I did a 10-city tour across the United States, from the East Coast to the West Coast, interviewed personally 1,000 pastors and youth pastors in roundtables, went over the 7 values, double thumbs up, cross-checked it all with the book of Acts, all over the book of Acts, cross-checked it with the epistles, all over the epistles. So I ended up writing a book called Gospelize Your Youth Ministry, and it's based on the 7 values as found in the book of Acts. So the 7 values, very quickly, I just want to give a little background on where they kind of came from. So that's why I say we didn't develop these; we discovered them. And when you see them, you can't unsee them. Mm-hmm. Once you see them, you're like, "Oh my goodness, how did I miss this?"
And with that, it's like we talked about these like to youth leaders and like, okay, well, like share them, and then like they share them, like that's it. Like, because they're obvious. Like you're like, hey, I've read the book of Acts and I've seen these. Like, wait.
It's like that. Remember those pictures you used to stare at, and you try to stare and see the image in the picture, and then finally it would pop that 3D image. Yeah. It's the same way as once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? Mm-hmm. And so the first one is intercessory prayer fuels it. So the youth groups that reached the most of the lost prayed for the lost. They prayed. They prayed that God would, reach them and that God would open a door to their hearts. And so, again, no duh, but that's not generally speaking a part of the way we do youth ministry. Number two, relational evangelism drives it. So teenagers were equipped with gospel urgency, gospel fluency, some sort of gospel strategy. Three is leaders fully embrace and model it. So the leaders were living this out of prayer and evangelism and disciple multiplication, and it was part of the way that they rolled.
Yeah.
Starting with the youth leader, then the adult leaders, student leaders. Fourth, there was a disciple multiplication strategy that guided it. So, they weren't all the same discipleship multiplication strategy, but there was something, a process in place to make sure it wasn't just converts, but disciples who make disciples. Fifth is a bold vision focuses it. So there was a bigger, bolder vision for what we call across the street, across the tracks, across the world, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth. Six is biblical outcomes measure it. So they were measuring the right things, which is not attendance. It's things like new conversion growth, baptisms, gospel, number of gospel conversations, spiritual maturation points. And then seventh, ongoing programs reflect it. So that the programs of the youth leader reflected those priorities. They baked it in. And weren't just platitudes. They were true priorities.
It wasn't just on their website.
It wasn't just on their website. It was on their program rundown and their calendar. Yeah. So those were the 7 values. And, they're real basic, but they're very, very effective. And as I look back when I pastored a church, we almost organically did a lot of those values because we were trained in a very intentional disciple multiplication, gospel advancing philosophy by the guy that reached my whole family for Christ. And when we planted the church, we did a lot of that. So we started the church with 23 people. When I left 10 years later, we had about 1,200 people, but over 62% of our congregation came to Christ from people reaching people with the gospel. And it's because a lot of these values, even though we hadn't named them yet, were just being done. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome. So then after the gospel advancing ministry values, like you started, or you affirmed those and they came out of the research and started emphasizing those. So you guys made kind of a shift. I kind of, noticed it from afar, but like just of what your intentional focus was from not just, teaching students on how to share the gospel, which you guys still provide resources for and help with that, but you kind of made a shift to really focusing on equipping youth leaders to do that, to really do that. And talk about that shift and like, what did that look like for you guys as a ministry and how did that come to be?
Well, it's strategic because if you train a youth leader, you get them to buy off on whatever that training is or the strategy, philosophy, then every student in their youth group and every student they'll ever have in their youth group is going to be affected by that. So the way I describe it very simply, I live in youth ministry world, so I use simple analogies so I can understand them, is, for 25 years, we trained teenagers to chuck gospel seeds, right? We still do that, but now we also train youth leaders to build greenhouses because we want to see those seeds multiply throughout the year. Yeah. And what we discovered is when it's just event-driven, kids would come out to Dare to Share, and for a weekend, that was their. But we started finding youth leaders that were like, we do evangelism. We go to Dare to Share every year. I'm like, oh, we're just a checkbox. It's not part of your system. Yeah. You scratch that itch so you don't feel guilty from the conviction of the Holy Spirit by coming to a Dare to Share event. And it's good. I'm glad they did that at least. But how do you make it part of their system? Yeah. Because if we're gonna really reach a nation, if we're gonna really reach the world, going to really reach our community, our city, then evangelism's got to be organic and it's got to be consistent and it's got to be the way we roll every week. And so that became increasingly more of our focus. And the other thing is we started realizing that God gave us more of a global vision. I was over in Israel 8 years ago with 180 ministry leaders from 53 countries. And I'm talking to this guy named Don Olding, and
which Don's been on this podcast.
Yeah, Don, so, Big Don, and Paul Bowman from Northern Ireland. And I'm talking to them, and I'm asking them about their ministries. And then they asked me about my ministry, and I'm like, well, it's a state-based ministry you never heard of because we weren't global. It's called Dare to Share. And he goes, life in 6 words, Brew? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, Brew, we use your material. Why aren't you global? I'm like, I don't know, because I'm a train wreck in my own country. I'm afraid of going in the world. And Paul Bowman used our materials as well. We start finding out there's more and more international people, way more than we thought, using our
Yeah.
material. So on the top of Mount Arbel, where the Great Commission was given, we heard a sermon on the Great Commission, and I ran over to our now president, Debbie Brasina, and Doug Holliday with Sun Life, and I said, God's called us to go global.
Yeah.
I just got the call.
Yep.
We put our hands in the middle. I still got that picture right by my desk of all three of our hands in the middle. And to go global, we started realizing, listen, if it's about training youth leaders in gospel advancing, and we want to do that globally, we use 90% of our resources to pull off these massive conferences. And so we said, we're going to have to kill the conferences. So the conferences were our Isaac, except for the Lord did not stay our hand, right?
Yeah.
We killed them, and we switched to a simulcast, and now it's on demand. So we do a global day of youth evangelism called Dare to Share Live. It's 3 hours of inspiration, equipping, and training, and students go out to share the gospel. But this last year we had tens of thousands of teens participate in 43 countries, and it's not tens of thousands now that we train; it's thousands of tens.
Yeah.
So it's 10 kids here, 5 kids here, 50 students here. We had 3,000 in Nigeria. Crazy. Whereas one of the highly persecuted countries, but still Dare to Share events all across the United States, but they happen in your own youth room and it's completely free.
Yeah.
So we could scale it, right? So that in that process, we get the youth leaders that sign up, and then we give them the 7 values and the ebook, and let's build that culture of evangelism, and let's see a movement take place.
That's awesome. Now, I know you provided so much leadership through this, and just following the Lord, and you've been around the youth ministry world for so long, and you even put it as like you've got the one string guitar, like you're just youth ministry evangelism, and you're playing that guitar. I'm always fascinated and encouraged, honestly, by your endurance to be so focused on this mission. And so my question is, like, how do you do it? Like, how do you stay so hyper focused and honestly just motivated, not burning out, not losing track? We see that with so many different organizations. They have mission drift, you have moral failures of leaders, all this stuff, and you've been a constant, by God's grace. And so what are some things that keep you going? Like, what are some things that keep you motivated?
Yeah, we're like Liam Neeson in Taken. We have a very particular set of skills. We will look for you, we will find you, and we will gospelize you. I feel I'm no apostle, but I feel almost an apostolic type of calling toward teenagers. When I was a kid, 14 years old, I used to doodle stadiums because I wanted to be the next Billy Graham. And then I heard at 15, I heard him say, "We've done it bigger and better than anyone since the early church, and we haven't made a dent." And I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to make a dent if Billy Graham didn't make a dent. So I started thinking, there's got to be a better way. I started thinking, well, what if you were training Christians how to share the gospel? And so I started looking at the stadiums different. And then I heard John Maxwell say, even the shyest person will influence 10,000 others in their lifetime. So now I start seeing that evangelist as being, okay, that's a Christian sharing the gospel with the 10,000 people. They're going to, not me anymore in that picture. And then realizing, well, youth come to Christ quicker and spread the gospel faster. So now when I look at those I still have those, I carry them on my phone, those old pictures. When I look at it, I see an 8th grade boy, I see a 9th grade girl, and a stadium full of people they're going to influence over the course of their lifetime. So that keeps me motivated. 1 billion teens. The other thing is I consider myself half monk, half missionary. So I really spend time, I'm not trying to over spiritualize, but I spend time every day at 5 a.m. You can ask my family since they were where they're going to find their dad. Sitting on the couch with my Bible open, praying, reading my Bible, scouring areas of my life that need adjusted, and there are many, and going on prayer walks with my family, consistently, spending time with the Lord. The other thing is I work out. I work out every day because I don't want to lose strength and energy. I've taken a vacation with my family every year since we've gotten married. My wife and I have gotten married when we could afford it. Back when we couldn't afford it, we'd sit through timeshare presentations, and I would tell the guys, there's no way I'm going to ever do this, but I want the 3 days and 2 nights so I can enjoy time with my wife. And never got a timeshare, but I stayed a lot of timeshare. We would do whatever it took to make time. We have time to rest and relax, and really fighting for your marriage.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I are polar opposites. She's, her dad was an IBM engineer, and, lived in Boulder, Colorado. I was trailer court, kid, and apartment complexes. Very different in our personality, but we made it work.
Mm.
And so I think really taking care of the home front and your spiritual day by day walk with the Lord and prayer and relentless, confession and authenticity and failing forward and figuring stuff out, and don't give up. Don't give up. So I think the other thing too that's kept me through is, when you lead people to Christ, it's like, water boy. It's like tackle and fuel. It keeps you going,
Yeah.
man. And if you're just stuck in a system, I'm kind of a rebel. Like, I'm like, if it ain't broke, break it. Like, the system we have of youth ministry is broken,
Mm.
and we need to declare it.
Yeah.
And let's reshape it. Let's
Yeah.
not, let's not just burn it down, but let's build something up
Yeah.
that's new and better. And I'm excited because we're hearing stories from around the world of youth leaders that are, you're taking this out and putting it into practice with, with your edge clubs and the youth leaders in your area. And we're hearing stories like this around the world. So it's exciting to be part of God's move. This is not Dare to Share's move. We call the gospel advancing a radical, paradigm that's 2,000 years old.
Yeah. That's awesome. Now, one of the things that I've admired about you as well is just how well connected you are partnership wise. Like you work well with other people. You've been in the trenches of youth ministry in so many different areas and so many different seasons. I mean, even when I started in youth ministry, goodness, 20 years ago, it was a lot different than it is now.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, like from your perspective, being so in tune with different aspects of ministry, even now globally, how do you see youth ministry being more effective in the next 5 years? What are some obviously not like prophetic predictions or anything, but how do you see
I'll give you my prophetic
yeah, your
predictions.
predictions of how youth ministry will be more effective in the next 5-10 years?
Well, I feel like if it's going to be, we're seeing less and less full-time youth leaders. A lot of volunteer leaders. I think what we're going to have to do is have pastors buy off on the strategic value of youth ministry and really support it. We lost a lot of really great youth leaders to become church planters. What's happening is guys are coming right out of seminary and planting churches. A lot of them are failing. I really think if you're going to be an effective church planter, 9 out of 10 times you should be a youth leader first, because it teaches you to say yes, sir, for a while. It shows you the system from the inside out. You learn. If you can speak to 20 middle schoolers, you could speak at the largest church, and teenagers, they're just a great testing ground to see if you got the grit. And so I feel like if we're going to really shift things, we need to have entire churches buy off on the strategic value of youth ministry. And last year I was in Missouri. I was preaching to about 1,500 pastors, and my whole talk was, listen, if you miss youth, you missed the movement. And I really said, hey, man, if you were a business guy and you knew that 80% of a demographic was going to be most likely to buy your product, how much effort would you put into, marketing to that 80%? And I said, we all know 80% of those that come to Christ do so by the age of 18 years old. And I said, we also know down deep inside why we don't put the effort into that, because they don't tithe. Teenagers don't tithe. I said, but our currency in ministry is not money, it's souls.
Yeah.
And you could feel the conviction in that room. And I had youth pastors come up to me after and say, hey, man, our entire deacon board came up and asked for forgiveness and said they're going to start focusing more on. So I think we need to shift youth ministry, not to be I'm not saying like a family ministry focus. Sometimes that'll, I know with good intention, obviously we want moms and dads that are involved in, in discipling their own kids. I believe parents are the ultimate youth leaders, that parents that love God.
Yeah.
But let's also live in the real world. We're not in Leave It to Beaver Town. We're not in the Andy Griffith Show anymore. We have a lot of broken families where moms and dads are not, some of them aren't saved.
Yeah.
I came from one of those broken families. I never knew my dad. I led my mom to Christ and discipled her when I was 15 years old. So I think that's more the norm now, like kids coming from broken families. So we can't just depend on a family ministry approach. We have to really strategically build our churches around reaching the unreached. We need to look at teenagers and children as an unreached people group in our own cities
Yeah.
and start being strategic, and like, man, guys, if you are just focused on adults. I was in construction for 8 years. It's like taking a jackhammer and having to break up all the concrete for a driveway versus just pouring the wet cement.
Mm-hmm.
Youth ministry and children's ministry, you just pour the wet cement.
Yeah.
Adult ministry, but you better get your jackhammer and wheelbarrow because it's going to be a lot of work before you can pour that wet cement. Not that we don't focus on adults, not that we don't have a strategic, but if we really believe that our job is to make and multiply disciples and we're not going young, we're missing the boat.
Yeah.
We miss youth, we miss the movement. So I think in the future, if our churches shift to that strategic focus, I believe we have a bright hope. If not, we'll just keep looking for the radicalized remnant that get it.
Yeah. That's huge. And you see so many different issues that are kind of unique to our day and age. So, there's obviously sin is the common thread, but we see that play out in different ways. And so how is youth ministry shifting as you've seen, just even with the whole like identity, like with
LGBTQ
and what is going on with that as far as like, is that a huge hindrance to the gospel moving forward?
Oh
Like,
man.
How does
I
that
don't
look
think,
like?
people don't know what do we do? Like it's a unique, it's the unpardonable sin. I'm like, guys, these kids in the LGBTQ community desperately need the hope of Christ. They're struggling with identity.
Yeah.
When I was a teenager, somebody struggled with identity. They'd paint their fingernails black. We'd call them goth, right? Today, a lot of kids that struggle with identity, identify as LGBTQ. I don't know if all of them are actually that, but they're identifying as that because it brings acceptance. And they're struggling. It's just, when you're a teen, you got hormones going through your body, and you're watching, TikTok videos, and things are getting, it's confusing as it is. I think the church needs to be clear what the Bible says, and it's clear. The Bible is clear on these issues, and loving. So I think what we need to do is mobilize our Christian kids to engage the LGBTQ community with the hope of Christ, finding their identity in Christ, and then, as the old fisherman says, you got to catch them before you clean them. So many times we're trying to fix people before their nature is transformed. And I'm like, man, let's give them a new heart, and then we'll give them a new mind, give them new habits, and God will do his sanctifying work. It's not reparative therapy. It's regeneration. You're a new creation in Christ. And so I think we need to just launch gospel conversations in that community. What people I've talked to, I got a buddy Colin, he's here at Palm Desert. He's got every teen clubs in Palm Desert, and he says a lot of the kids that come are LGBTQ, and he just does a Q&A with the Bible and buys everybody pizza, and I think they just put questions in a basket, and he answers from the Bible, and a lot of questions about LGBTQ. He answers honestly from Scripture, and then shares the gospel, and it's growing from campus to campus to campus, and he said these LGBTQ kids are not angry; they're interested. So I'm like, man, don't underestimate the power of the gospel to really, truly change lives.
Yeah.
Now
let's go back to the gospel advancing ministry values. Where we're seeing gospel advancing. You guys recently did a research project that kind of evaluated the effectiveness. And tell us about that, because you shared some of the results, and of course we're really encouraged by them. But share a little bit about what that research project.
So we compared the gospel, it's to an outside research project, Clarity Research, that did the project, but they compared gospel advancing ministries with control groups, right? And so gospel advancing ministry, the top 3 takeaways, and we're still, pulling together all the research, but top 3 takeaways so far is 2 times more teen converts. So teens reaching teens with the gospel, which is awesome. Because not only are kids coming to Christ, but Christian teens are leading them to Christ, right? And getting them involved. 2 is there's three times the overall growth, which means not just unreached teens are attracted to these youth ministries, but Christian teens get more compelled because they're on mission. And then third, the average Christian teen has has 50 gospel conversations in a year,
Yeah.
which is astounding and awesome.
That's awesome.
And so, our research guy, Scott Friedrich, basically said that normally I come to ministries and groups with good news and bad news. I just have good news. So I had to double and triple check my research.
Yeah.
And, and he shared those with us. And I'm like, yay, the New Testament works. And,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's nice. I mean, truth is truth, but
Mm.
it's nice to see it statistically verified
Yeah.
that gospel advancing is really way more effective than typical youth ministry.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, well, praise the Lord that we're seeing, or that's confirmed. I mean, it's stuff that I think we already knew. That's what
Yep.
we've seen, personally. So, and this was what was cool is when you shared that research, I was like, oh my goodness, this is what we're seeing. So the students that we've trained with Edge Club, on average, are having 50 gospel conversations a year.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so, and I was like, I don't really have anything to compare that to. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know if that's like, is that, normal? Is that way too many? Or is
Yeah.
that, I mean, or is that
Yeah.
more than what? And so it was cool to see that up on the screen today
So encouraging.
and see that that's what we're seeing as well. So, yeah. Now with that, okay, so I know you travel
Yeah.
a lot to speak different places. You've been to many different cities,
Yeah.
really all around the world, but a lot in the U.S.
Yeah.
Share some of your best travel tips. So like when you're
Well,
you're
my
going,
best my best travel tip is, don't check your luggage.
yeah,
Like, take it with you if you possibly can.
Yeah.
So I really, and did my family and I went to Europe. I was preaching in Austria. This is 10 years ago, and then I preached 3 weeks later in England, and we were able to. Each of us had one backpack. That's all we had for 3 weeks. So get clothes that you can wash and hang up, and wash in the sink of your hotel and hang up and dry overnight. I would say too is, I mean, go splurge a little bit on your hotel. When I say little bit, I mean, Hampton Inn, is something that is going to be a little bit more,
yeah.
something you don't feel like you're.
No. Which they never have like any thefts or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like,
We literally had a Kia stolen from the hotel parking lot here.
yeah.
But, yeah, I would say too is, as I travel, when I'm by myself, I try to travel as short as possible, because I want to get back home.
Yeah.
But I don't take early flights if possible, because I want to be awake when I'm back home.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Good.
little things like that, just off
Yeah.
the cuff.
It's good. And now when you traveled a lot and you've been to different places, I'm sure people are so generous in food, giving you like their cultural version of food.
Yeah.
Where is like or what has been like your favorite experience food wise in all your travels?
Oh, this could be this week at the Gospel Advancing Summit. It's got to be right up there. Man, Switzerland, we had a lot of fun in Switzerland because we have some friends there. They took us to like chocolate shops where you pay a fee and then you can have all these different kinds of chocolate. It was like that in Willy Wonka when you go into the like
Was this Corey?
Corey? Yeah, Corey. And I'm like, they have like chocolate syrups, like you're taking chocolate shots, not with any alcohol. It's all chocolate, like, and then eating all kinds. Man, that was hard to beat. Chocolate in Switzerland.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all, I like the differences. So it's kind of fun to test different things out. Now, when I was in the Philippines, I did try some balut.
Yes. I've been to the Philippines and I had a limit of what I would say yes to.
Do you know what balut is?
I do. It's a duck egg.
It's a duck.
Like
2 days
embryo.
before it hatches, they boil it, and when you open it up, you see the beak and feathers.
Yep. Was it crunchy?
Mine wasn't, but you could see the stuff in there, and I ate 2 of them. So I drank the embryonic fluid, and then I ate 2 of them.
Yeah. Now chicken adobo, I can do all day. Like that's
I don't know what that is.
It's their chicken that they like the spices that they.
Oh
prepare.
yeah.
And it's but when it came to the balut, I was like,
The worst I had was cow brains in Egypt. It tasted like meaty cottage cheese. It gives me a gag reflex when I think about it. That's the best way I can describe it. Meaty cottage cheese. And I did it because people dare me. So anybody listening, that's the key.
you just gotta dare.
Dare me. Dare to
I'll have to
fear.
remember that because I'm sure I can use that to your disadvantage one day.
Yep.
So as you've preached all over the place, you've preached at different size crowds. What has been the weirdest thing that has happened while you were preaching? Which, by the way, none of these questions you knew about beforehand,
No,
but
I
so I
didn't.
just, yes, this is on the fly.
Well, when I first started preaching, one of the weird things is I was preaching. I go, "How many of you struggle with bitterness?" And my mom yelled out, "I do every day." I'm like, "Ma, that's a rhetorical question." And she goes, "Well, don't ask the stinking question. Wait, if you don't want the stinking answer." And everybody started cheering. I was like, "Ma, what are you doing?" Then there was another time where I thought something was going on, but there was a lady on the front row that was nursing her baby, and the baby was super loud, and I didn't realize what was going on. And once I realized, I preached to the other side of the stage, and it was so awkward. I was beat red, and I was back when I was a new pastor as well.
Uh,
Let's see what else. One time this was during a Dare to Share event early on.
yeah.
Um, I had an illustration of the monsters of fear keeping us from sharing our faith. And I had three like monsters come
Yeah.
rushing in. And I had what I thought was a blank gun, but it wasn't a blank gun. It was a riot dispersement gun that shot mace pellets all over the audience. This is 30 plus years ago. This would not happen today. And we had to take a break
Yeah.
because, I mean, everybody, including myself, it backfired in my face. I couldn't see. So I've had a lot of weird stuff happen.
This is during the sermon. Like, was this?
This is during the sermon, and I thought it was like, the youth pastor told me it shot blanks. Well, it shot like mace pellets.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
No,
I mean, that's funny now. I'm
it's
sure it
funny
wasn't then.
now.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm so glad we didn't get
yeah,
sued.
yeah. Now, with all the different conferences that you had, what was like the biggest incident that you had where you're like, I don't know how we're gonna recover from this, or like like where, like because I've heard different things with traveling conferences and stuff. It's like the
Yeah,
gear doesn't show up, and
yeah.
then you're like, there's a room packed full of people to hear. Or was there anything like that during the conference years?
Well, we had a major snowstorm in Columbus one year. We had 14 inches of snow, and everybody was calling us to cancel. And I'm like, well, we're here.
Mm,
So we had 5,000 kids signed up for the event. We had 2,000 show up.
wow.
And, but we had a great event.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, we're not. Kids went out in the snow and shared Christ the
Yep.
next day,
Which we've had instances like that where it's usually the camps that we've done that had the most incidents, like
Yeah.
unexpectedly, were the most impactful.
Yeah, God
And
does he does his thing. The other thing that happened one time is in Lincoln, Nebraska, we were at this church. That I love Lincoln, but this church, they had a security guard.
yeah,
We do a Friday night drama where it was based on a school shooting. And he's like, you can't use a fake gun, and you can't even make a gun sound. And I'm like, listen, Barney Fife, let me tell you, man, I was like, what in the world? I'm thinking in my mind, I didn't say that, but I didn't think we're going to be, and what dramas are a huge part of the way
yeah,
that we
I remember
roll
that.
as a
Yeah,
ministry. And so we had to make some crazy adjustments because of one security guard that I went to the senior pastor, and he's like, well, the security guard makes the call. I'm like, oh my goodness, man, who's running this place?
yeah.
But yeah, that was very frustrating.
Wow.
I almost went to jail.
Yeah,
Or,
man. Yeah. And so with that, like, what was some of the most memorable times, or maybe like if there was a single moment that you remember from all of your travels, like with, with teenagers, with the conference years, like even lead the causes. I mean, like we've brought students lead the
yeah.
cause, such an impactful time. But like, was there? I mean, of course, I feel like you just live on the highs of what we see like occasionally, in our ministries, like you guys, because you have a
Man,
unique perspective to it.
honestly, I cannot, I mean, I cannot point out just one.
Yeah.
I mean, God does something there's something powerful about putting teenagers on mission.
Mm,
And every time, every year, there's stories, not just story. So, and I just encourage youth leaders, if you want to, I think it's Mark Batterson that said, a lot of people don't see miracles because they don't put themselves in positions to see miracles.
mm,
Evangelism puts your kids in positions to see really genuine, life transforming, soul saving, game changing,
Yeah.
trajectory transforming mission miracles.
Yeah.
So get your kids on mission, and you will not be able to recount.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. I mean, I got the Kenny Rogers. Be time enough for counting when the dealing's done, and we can talk back through all that stuff, man. But
Yeah.
it's just powerful.
Yeah. That's great. Now, you talked about recently that you have an upcoming book coming out.
Yeah.
And set to launch on, is it August 20th?
August
Your
20th, my birthday.
Yeah.
My birthday.
And so tell us a little bit about that book and how we can get a hold of it. I can put a link in the description or anything.
Sure.
Which, by the way, he didn't ask us to promote this or anything, but we just want to hear about what's going on as you guys get ready for this launch.
Yeah, I wrote a book called Radical Like Jesus. I thought, man, if there's ever a radical who ever lived, it's Jesus, right? And so I did a study of the life of Christ from the youngest time we see him as a teenager, 12 years old, right? Through when he sent his disciples out to go and make disciples. Mm. So there's 21 snapshots of the life of Christ, and each chapter I unpack a different passage. Then we see the Radical Like Jesus challenge at the end of every chapter, where you take that challenge before you read the next chapter.
Yeah.
So that, the goal is to activate the Christian faith by reading it. So it's you go on Amazon, Radical Like Jesus. It's going to be available on Audible. I'll start a podcast in September, God willing, called Radical Like Jesus. We'll do more challenges and more snapshots of the life of Christ. But
yeah,
I'm excited. Forward by Louis Giglio, which is exciting.
It's great
because nobody knows who I am, so we kind of use Louis.
Yeah,
but he's awesome. He was really excited about the book. I counted it an honor.
We even Ryan and I were talking, just based on what we heard about the book. We're like, man, this would be perfect to walk through with student leaders.
Yeah, it really would. And it'll stretch them, and it's like, let's stop talking about stuff. Let's start doing it. Let's be radical like Jesus.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so as we close this episode, why don't you give us some encouragement, just like one or two sentences for a youth leader that might be discouraged right now. So they might be watching this after a discouraging talk that their senior pastor had with them about how they can't be reaching out to students. They might be wrestling with their insecurity or ineffectiveness of what they're doing. Give them a pumped up just encouragement right now that they can walk away with.
2 Peter 1 reminds us, you have everything you need for life and godliness, and you have everything you need for youth ministry. And I just encourage you, don't give up. This is a war. Richard Baxter said, Satan will seek to do the most harm to those who seek to do his kingdom the most damage. So Satan's going to do everything he can to deceive, discourage, distract, destroy you.
Yeah.
But put on your armor every day and fight the good fight. Be strong in the Lord and the power of his might, and zigzag toward the finish line, right? To fail forward, keep getting up. And at that day, when you cross that finish line, you collapse into the arms of the Lord Jesus Christ. You'll hear him whisper in your ear, well done, my good and faithful servant. And no matter how many kids you reach or don't reach or whatever, you just keep going for it.
Yeah.
And we're working ultimately for well done.
Yeah.
So just keep working for it in the power of Christ for the glory of Christ.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and thank you for your impact in my own life personally, just as a friend and as a mentor that you've influenced me even from afar over the years. So thank you so much. And so that concludes our episode this week. And if you are watching this on YouTube, please like, subscribe, comment below, do all the things. If you're seeing this on social media or even a podcast platform, love for you to share with other people. So the best compliment is a share. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.